live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And tonight will be no exception to the rule. It is probably the most talked about case in America right now. And it's unusual because there's no cameras allowed in there, no live tweeting, none of that. But we are talking about the Delphi murder trial out of Delphi, Indiana. For those who are not that familiar with it, Richard Allen is the defendant in this case. He's accused in the 2017 murders of 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German. They were found, it's hard to hear, but with their throats slit after going on a walk in a kind of a hiking trail area. Now, this trial began October 18th. Today is November 7th, 3 weeks in or so. It's 17 days of testimony, and I was wrong, over the course of 4 weeks. So I think we're into the fourth week here. Richard Allen is charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation in connection with the deaths of the two young girls. Without further ado, the best guests. Susan Hendricks. She is a former anchor for HLN. Doesn't exist anymore, but it was a cool channel. She also anchored at CNN out of CNN's Atlanta World Headquarters. She's now a true crime reporter. She's authored a book on the Delphi murders. Down the Hill, My Descent into the Double Murder in Delphi. Down the Hill. So pick it up if you haven't read it yet. Trying to join us right now is a criminal defense attorney named John Tompkins. He actually lives in Indianapolis. He is an attorney, a criminal defense attorney who's covering this and doing analysis for Fox 59 in Indianapolis, but he's been in the courtroom at Delphi. So hopefully we'll get him connected. He was driving. No bueno there. Susan, I'm going to keep you muted and unmuted because there's a little thing coming off your audio there. And last but certainly not least, Marcus Truccio. He joined Wayne 15 in Fort Wayne, Indiana in September of 2023. He's a graduate of Purdue. And most importantly, look at this, 3 native New Jerseyans on the panel. You can't beat that. I love it. It's weird. Susan and I are from literally like a couple miles apart. We figured that out a while back. So let's just dive into this. I'm really hoping that we get this third person, John Tompkins, on. Today, obviously, a huge day, Susan. Before we get to closings, I mean, what drew you into this case to the point that you actually wrote a book about it?
Well, when I was first introduced to it, I was at CNN, and I remember covering it on the set. It was breaking news where they found Abby and Libby's bodies. And as you know, when it's breaking news, Joel, you'll get the producer in your ear to say this is who you're interviewing, and it was Ron Logan because the bodies were discovered on his property. So that was the first time I was introduced to this. And of course, what drew me in was the cell phone footage that Libby was able to get. Now, soon after, it was just a still photo from that video. But once the video and audio, and you're thinking, these are 2 young girls. And speaking of New Jersey, I thought about my house and going, we'd call it down the brook behind my house, and we'd walk in these sewer pipes and walk around. It reminded me of my sister and I, who were a year apart. So that's what drew me into it, thinking 2 young girls. But I had no idea until I visited that area and visited the bridge, how deep in the woods it was and how you knew it was a local and who could do this. And when you see him on the bridge, at first you think he's just strolling, and it's about 63 feet high. So it's massive, and it's a different take once you're there, and just getting to know the families, how wonderful they are. They've been in court every single day.
Yeah, and I told the audience last night you were supposed to join, but I think you mentioned it, that you were talking to the young girls' families. So, I mean, there's nothing, and Susan knows this, and Marcus knows this, there's nothing like being kind of boots on the ground. Just a quick follow-up question. You know, you said that you knew it had to be a local. You're absolutely certain of that? I mean, you don't think, like, I thought maybe if it's somebody else, maybe a trucker, someone driving through the area, but that you don't think that's
what I thought, Joel. But when you come here and you walk, because first time here, I think it was 2018, and I'm with 2 CNN photojournalists, and they're like, look, there's a sign that says no trespassing. We just had a meeting. We can't get arrested. And I said, I'll walk on myself. So I keep walking and walking, and I heard my mother's voice in my ear, like, don't, be careful. And I'm like, Mom, it's after the fact, but the more I walk, the denser it takes 12 minutes, at least for us, and it was about 9 degrees that day, to get down there, to even find it. So yes, there are a lot of trucks, but there's no way that a truck would pull up and a guy's gonna walk 15 minutes to find this bridge. To me, it was a place like the back of our house growing up. It's something that kids or teenagers did, and it's kind of hidden. And there's no way that I thought that someone would just come upon it. So that's why. And of course, everyone who's amazing, who I interviewed since then, who specializes in that, understood it too, who visited, saying, got to be a local because of where it is. And you hear the trains.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds like Jersey or Manhattan right there. But as you can tell, Susan is in front live from the courthouse. So I'm going to keep her muted unless she's answering. But Marcus, to you, obviously you were with us last night. You gave us some really great information. Let's hop into a question, then we'll get to the closings. But this is Rosemary Romero outside of Toronto. Was the insanity defense even an option in Delphi? Why wouldn't they have gone with it? I assume it was not an option in this case. Are you aware of this, Marcus?
So I'm actually not totally sure. Maybe Susan, you can hop in if the defense team even tried that, because I know that I don't think they did either, because it was kind of an evolutionary thing. They took on Richard Allen in November of 2022 when he was first incarcerated, and all the things that came afterward kind of evolved from there, because his first confession wasn't until April of 2023, so about 5 months later.
Susan, you want to just add to that?
Yeah, there is something that they've explained, and Marcus will tell you this as well. What they're saying, what the defense is saying, and they brought it up in closings, because he was in a maximum security prison where they had the warden on the stand. And I said, this isn't good. He shouldn't have been there. But it goes back to the small town atmosphere here. In Carroll County, the jail just couldn't hold him. They didn't have the facility. They thought his life would be at risk, considering what he was arrested for. But the maximum security prison, or medium security with the maximum center they were describing it as, the warden even said, never in his 20 plus years had they ever had someone who wasn't convicted of a crime. So they are saying he was in solitary, I think it was 13 months, and that they blame that on the confessions. And they say it was a psychosis that took over, and then he came out of it, but it was about being in solitary, and they're explaining away the confessions through that.
Yeah, and that's, I know that was part of the closings today. I think we have John Tompkins. Let me try this. Hey, John, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I am, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. You're not driving currently, are you?
No, I'm not.
All right, we've got a weird echo. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. But I will mute myself, I guess, after posing a question. But I mean, John, to you, you're a criminal defense attorney. What's it like covering it almost as a reporter here for Fox in Indianapolis?
Well, it's a completely different experience. I try to remain neutral, but my defense attorney bias does come through. I hope that's useful.
What's I mean, obviously we're closing, which we're going to get into in a moment. I'm just having an audio issue here, so I'm trying to figure out what to do with that on the fly. But do you have your Bluetooth in, John?
No.
Okay.
I could try that.
I might bounce you out and have you try that, because it's going to be tough to do it this way. But what did you think of closings today? Who do you think had the advantage when it was all said and done?
I think the defense had a more effective closing, because I think they kept their case and their message a lot tighter than the state. I think Mr. Rossi lost it a little bit at the end when he tried to make, I think, a little too much of an image connection with the a torture connection with the solitary confinement.
So someone just gave me the great idea of muting John when I'm talking, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to be playing host and audio technician tonight, all night long. I cannot wait for this. Marcus, back to you since you have the best audio. Tell us about the closings today. Obviously, yesterday you were here. It was a very abrupt resting by the defense. Just came suddenly, I think at 9:06 or something in the morning. And then today, obviously, the judge spoke to them. They were jurors were released early yesterday, but everyone was back, bright and early today. And what was the mood just, as the state was going up to deliver its closings? The defense went, and then there was a rebuttal. What was the mood in the courtroom like?
Well, I think even just going into the courtroom before the judge even walked in, the mood from yesterday kind of continued into today. Yesterday, I was saying that people were surprised first thing to walk into the defense resting their case. They thought maybe it would happen a couple hours later or maybe even the next day. And it hit that this is going to be over soon. It's going to be in the hands of the jury. And that was very evident in the courtroom this morning. Like I said, when you're covering this trial, like me and Susan have been doing, when you get to day 13, day 14, it's kind of hard to see where you're at. And now we're here at this time where it's now in the hands of the jury. And I think, starting the closing arguments, starting with the prosecution this morning, that was on top of all of people's minds, not only paying attention to those closing arguments, but knowing that very soon it's going to be in the hands of the jury.
Susan, I got to ask you, by the way, this comment here from Patty Barnett that Bradley Rozzi, the defense attorney, is a very good attorney. It sounds like it. Haven't been able to watch him argue, obviously, in person. But Susan, if you had to take a guess here, do you think this is going to be a long deliberation? You expecting this to go a while?
And I just want to quickly touch on what Marcus said. He's absolutely right when he said it's just that feeling if it's finally over. But I noticed from where I was sitting right behind Anna, who is Abby's mom, I could hear her sobbing. And this is before it even started. And I got the sense, and then Tara was hugging her, that's Libby's aunt. I got the sense that exactly what Marcus said. This is finally going to be over. The girls are never coming back, no matter the outcome, but so much is at stake. And I can't imagine, I'm just speculating, but that emotional kind of overload of, oh my gosh, this is it. This is a big day for closing arguments. And yeah, Rosie is a good attorney. He really is. And Nick is excellent too. He was underestimated coming into this. He really was. I think he's been on point consistently. I think that I really thought that he did a better job, and that's coming from me. That's my opinion. But I think coming out and laying out the story and he showed a map of the bridge because the jurors weren't able to see this bridge. And I think that may have hindered it. The defense wanted that. The prosecution said no. I think that was a mistake because you really don't get a sense unless you go there and you see it. So during the trial, they showed exhibit after exhibit after exhibit. It would lasted about 2 hours to show, but I don't really think you get the sense. So we started with the map, and it was based on the girls that were there that day and kind of a timestamp, but he simplified it. Here's where Abby and Libby were. Here's where Richard Allen put himself. Betsy Blair, one of the witnesses, she crossed at this time. So it laid out to say, look, Richard Allen put himself there. If he put himself there, he's bridge guy. No one else was there. Why didn't Richard Allen see bridge guy? And when it was laid out to him and he was shown an image of himself, he said, if you believe it's just you. And he said, well, if it was taken with the girl's phone, it's not me. Then Nick McClellan got right into the crime scene photos. He paused and said, this will be rough. He showed the girls a close-up of their neck. It's horrific to see. But he wanted to say, this is what he did to those girls. Then he did this. Then he walked and lived his own life like nothing had ever happened. So it takes us through that story. So I thought he did a good job, but the defense did as well, poking holes, no DNA evidence, saying that he was in a maximum security person he shouldn't have been in. So I don't know how this is going to go. And Joel, you've covered so many trials. And I remember you kind of speculate. And with Joey Jackson, I had so many times with Jodi Arias and Casey Anthony. You don't know, but there's speculation. Tomorrow's Friday. Could it be Friday? They are sequestered. So keep that in mind too. I don't know.
John, I'm coming back to you, and I think we figured this out. I'll just keep everyone muted till I get to them. So my audio technician work is paying off. So John, Susan made a point. We saw this in the Murdoch trial. We see it in a lot of trials. There was an issue with the so-called Idaho 4 about leaving the house up where those young students were murdered. But why, in your opinion, was there no road trip here to the site? That's, in my opinion, a good idea because it gives all the jurors a real good perspective. Let's start there. Oh, and now we can't hear you. Oh, you know why? Because now we go. Go ahead, John.
Okay. No, I don't know why the state opposed the scene visit. I agree with Susan. That would have been very useful in a case like this, just for the jury to be able to understand the state's arguments and their narrative of how this supposedly took place and how it was even possible. It lets the landmarks speak to the jury and then lets them say, literally physically, would this have been possible? How could he have done this?
It's funny, John. I mean this in all good fun, but you're giving me TV sound bites. You're not used to podcasting, and you're used to Fox 59 in Indianapolis, where you got to talk in 10 seconds. But feel free to let it all out. That's why podcasting, by the way, is in all deference to Fox 59 and Wayne 15. This is the future, John Tompkins. So got to get you here in the world of podcasting, and Marcus as well. So Marcus, just tell the people who are watching, they are sequestered. Where they've been staying, are they basically chaperoned into the courthouse every day? And what did you make of them today during these closings?
Yeah, so they're under very heavy supervision. They're from Allen County, which is where Fort Wayne is, where I work. But we don't know exactly where they're staying. We don't have any of that information because they want to protect the jury, especially from the media outside who's talking about the case. So they actually, at the Carroll County Courthouse, have kind of this makeshift tunnel with curtains outside that the jury goes in and out of when they come in and leave for the day in a van, and we don't know exactly where they go. We know they're in a hotel somewhere. Judge Frangel has said that, but they're under the supervision of a bailiff. They have DVDs that they could watch movies on, but they can't go on and turn on a regular channel because if it's popping up with coverage of this trial, that'll compromise it. They, on the weekends, on Sundays, have been able to have supervised visits with family and supervised time with electronics. They're allowed to respond to work emails and stuff like that, but that is all under supervision of bailiffs. And that kind of even tightens up now during deliberation. So Judge Frangel was saying that if this does go well into the weekend and we get to Sunday, Sunday will still be a rest day for them, but they won't even be able to use their electronics. It'll be kind of just, they're there for Sunday, eating and existing, and then they'll come back in on Monday if they have to.
I actually need this. It's like a digital detox. I need this really badly. I hope I get sequestered soon. It sounds like torture, actually. Do you know, by the way, Marcus, are they getting paid more than the large sum that a typical juror makes, which is like $15 a day? Do you get more if you're sequestered?
So that's an interesting question because I don't know the exact number where we are of what that would normally be. I do know, though, that they got $80 a day for their first week and then $90 a day for every week that followed. So that's what they're getting.
Goes a long way. You can buy one shoe, not a pair of shoes, I guess. Trekking 360 here. Susan, back to you on this one. By the way, John, you're the only non-native New Jerseyan here, but we still love you. We still love you. Trekking 360. One false confession, maybe. 63, nope. I know it was over 60 confessions. Susan, how did the jurors get around that? I mean, obviously the defense is saying, look, this guy was tortured. He was in a psychotic stage. But is that something that you think the jurors can get past?
Well, Nick McClellan played that during closing, and it was one particular phone call. I believe he played two during closings with his mom. And you heard that. He said, Mom. You could tell he wasn't pressured into this. I could see if it was the authorities and he was pressured or was to a warden there. And there is in my mind, because you speculate, like, why would he do that? Why are there so many? And they only played during the trial, I believe it was 7 phone calls that we heard, confessions to his wife and mom. And I'm thinking, did he just say, uh-oh, I'm in trouble here. I'm just going to start confessing all over the place. I'm just going to like do 50 and say things that didn't happen. Because in one of the confessions, he said, I killed my grandchildren. Well, he doesn't have any. So was that the follow-up via the advice of the attorneys? I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm just throwing that out there. But so there are so many, right? But it's like, can they explain that away with solitary confinement? And they had doctors on the stand. Even the state's expert, I thought, said he's never seen this. So that's a problem for the state. That's a big problem. And I know they played Richard Allen. The judge allowed it with no audio. They showed him, because he was filmed 24/7 outside of the cell and inside of the cell, and the looks on their faces. And this was a tough day for the families, because it was Rosie, I believe, who said, for the respect and dignity of Richard Allen, we're only going to show the jurors, not to his family or to everyone who was there in court. And the families are saying, what about the dignity of Abby and Libby? Libby's naked in the crime scene photos. It's horrific. They have like blocked out certain areas, but it is the most horrific thing I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot at CNN for 15 years. So there was anger there, because guess what? We sat in silence for about, I don't know, was it an hour one day, while the families have to look at their expression. So it's been tough for the families at times.
As we listen to that train go by, let me ask you this: there was a train by the courthouse, but what have you been told in terms of warning? You're going to get like a 30-minute warning. Family, are they getting a warning ahead of the reading of the...
Did you ask me?
Yeah, you said. Yeah.
I know. Sorry about the train. It's funny. The first night before opening statements, I got here at 11:30 at night, because you have to wait outside. This is unlike any trial I've ever covered, Joel. But you know what? You don't want to go in and start complaining to the families. But I'm camping out. This is like Skid Row. And I met so many wonderful people, and it was a local reporter. She's so sweet. She's brand new. I said, where are you going? She was laying on the floor. She goes, to the newsman. I go, I'm coming with you. And I'm laying down, and I hadn't slept in 24 hours. I'm telling you this, hence the train. But I'm in this kind of half sleep, and all of a sudden I hear that. I go, oh my gosh, she's young. She parked on the train tracks. And I wake up screaming. She screams. The heat's on. I mean, you can't make this up. So that's on the outside, right behind me. But I can't believe it's fine. They're deliberating now. And I have heard they're staying in Lafayette. But exactly, they're really tight-lipped about this. So we didn't get much information. Judge Gull is running this like nothing I've ever seen, and I don't blame her. She does not want this, it's clear, to be Karen Reed at all. And I know you both can attest to this. I mean, they keep moving the goalposts of when are we going to know? What are we doing? There's chairs even out there. Deliberations, as you know, Joel. You can estimate, you never really know. But it could be 5 days from now. I don't know. I'm thinking I'm just going to hang around here, go back and forth. I'm staying in Lafayette. But I think the first thought is the families, of course, when this comes down. So I don't know how or when we'll hear. Do you guys know?
Did I hear you correctly? Did you say they're deliberating at this hour? I thought they were not.
Oh, no.
Okay.
That's something that's my soundbite.
Oh, okay.
No, I meant literally they're
in the process. I got you.
Exactly. You got it. Yeah.
I got you. So John Tompkins, back to you here. If I was a defense attorney, and I'm definitely no legal, scholar by any means, exact opposite. But here's a guy who, as I understand it, has absolutely no criminal history, worked at CVS. How, in your opinion, I mean, you've seen defendants, a lot in your career, people with a criminal element to them. What do you make of the fact that if he's convicted of this, let's say, just hypothetically, that this guy just had zero crimes attributed or attached to him? Seems a little bit odd to me. What do you make of it?
Well, I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, earlier today, I had a conversation on this very topic. I've got to say, I'm going to try to get a little New Jersey cred. I do have a federal district court case in New Jersey right now that's
I
pending.
love
I
it.
may be out there in December.
I love it.
Regardless. No, so, and what I was saying was, the power of the state pointing at a defendant at the defense table in a courtroom that is built to be grand. Even Carroll County, Indiana has this magnificent courthouse with old architecture, and it's just an imposing structure and all the authority of the state. And they point at the person and say, we, the state of Indiana, think he's guilty. But if you're sitting in the elbow room and some guy comes walking in and says, hey, Rick, he works down at the CVS. He's never really been in trouble. He's got a nice house. He's got a wife who loves him. He's never done anything crazy. He's never looked at porn on his phone or on his computer, because we sure would have heard about that. He's never looked at little girls. He's never had the neighbors say he's creepy at Halloween looking at all the little girls' costumes. Well, he decided for the first crime he ever was going to commit in his life that he'd put 2 knives in his pocket and a gun, and he'd go down to the local trail in a small town, and try to find a teenager who, by the way, in a small town is going to grow up and start going to the CVS where he works and see him someday in the future, to kidnap them off the trail. And it turned into a murder. Even the state didn't say it was planned as a murder. And that's his plan. That's his first foray into crime. And then all of a sudden he's incredibly shaken up by a van that's driving by somewhere several hundred meters away, and everything goes to pot, and he figures out how to kill 2 people in this horribly brutal way in the first crime he's ever committed in his life. That story does not ring true. And I really do wish that a component of that part of it, who is this guy and how does he get there from where the life that is known of him? And then he commits this heinous crime, cuts 2 girls' throats open. That is up close and personal. That is in arm's length, killing someone. And he keeps it together for 5 years in that community. He doesn't lose it then. All very incredible.
That sounds like a seasoned criminal defense attorney. I'm listening to him and I'm thinking there's no way this guy's guilty, but I'm easily swayed. And don't send me hate mail. I was, I'm just making a little funny point there. Denise, on a very serious topic. Denise, News Junkie, thank you so much for giving us a super sticker. They go a really long way. I'm coming back to Marcus, I promise. But Susan, I'm curious just to have you piggyback off of what John just said. What about the fact that this guy had absolutely, a clean record, no criminal history, and suddenly at 50, whatever, he's 40 back then, 40 something, he's going to go and do this to 2 young girls. And to John's point, I didn't think about it. I mean, if he was looking at Kitty, on his phone, it would have come out in the trial. Nothing about that. So it's definitely an odd factor to this whole trial, isn't it?
Yeah, I know you've had, Joel, I know you've had Ann Burgess on several times, and I always think of Carrie Rawson, who you had on, BTK's daughter. She never knew. Her father would make her scrambled eggs, said, make sure you fill up your tires, drove her to college, walked her down the aisle, and he was a vicious killer. I think that this guy could have fantasized about this for years and went down there. He lived very close to this bridge and planned this. And he said during one of the confessions that he was laying in wait. So he watched the girls and he followed them onto the bridge. And maybe he had been planning this in his own head for years. You never know what goes on in someone's home. Now, of course, this isn't your average dad and the wife. There's been talk about if he is the killer, how would she not know? Well, your mind doesn't go there. You're never going to think the guy you knew since high school is going to be a double child murderer. I get that. And I'm not saying that I understand the psyche. I always ask Anne, is it nature or nurture? I mean, we want to know, what is this? What triggers this? I don't know what happened to him in his childhood. I'm not assuming anything. I'm just saying this does happen. We've seen it before with no priors, with someone like BTK, his daughter told us.
Marcus, back to you about closing arguments today. Obviously, that is the big headline. The prosecutor's name is Nick McLeland. According to what I read, he spent about 58 minutes just taking the jurors through the evidence and testimony. And he did replay video of Bridge Guy, the so-called Bridge Guy, and again showed these gory crime scene photos. And as you said, played Richard Allen, or Rick as they call him, his defense team, his recorded confessions. Do you feel the state had command during closings? I mean, you had to be looking at the jurors. What stood out to you?
Well, what I'll say about the jurors today is that they were giving very little reactions. Yesterday, I said I was kind of sensing in them that maybe they were ready. They were looking a little more restless than they were. But today, they were really laser focused. And I did notice that anytime they were talking about Richard Allen specifically, there were especially two jurors looking right at him for minutes at a time. So that was definitely on their minds, kind of hearing what they were hearing from the state and then looking at him kind of, I guess, thinking, could he have done this, or how is he reacting? And what I'll say about Richard Allen is the state would say something against him and he would shake his head. He was shaking his head no a lot during their closing arguments. And while the defense was going and making points, obviously on his behalf, he was shaking his head yes. So those were the reactions we were seeing from him. But as far as, who came out stronger, I really do think that they were a little different in their presentation and they were kind of neck and neck. Even Judge Gohl said today after the jury was outside the courtroom that both sides did very well. And she said she was impressed with their closing arguments. The state did a very linear layout. They had a PowerPoint ready to kind of just rehash everything that they went through in their evidence in their 2 weeks that they presented their case. And then Rosie on the defense took a little bit of a different approach, and he did it via themes. He pointed out different themes in this trial that he saw on how he sees the state messed up this investigation, things that they maybe didn't consider. So they did it in different ways, but I think they were both very strong.
Yeah, and in general, criminal defense attorneys are great storytellers. They're much more captivating, whereas prosecutors are a little more fact-based and maybe a little bit more boring, I guess. It is believed that the multi-homicide Brian Kohlberger, we covered that today, by the way. It was close to a 5-hour hearing. The judge is going to rule on whether or not he is, I guess, death penalty eligible, but he did not make a decision today. If anyone is going to face a possible death penalty case, it's going to be him. I don't see any way out of that, but I digress for a minute. Back to John, the criminal defense attorney who's doing analysis for Fox 59 in Indianapolis. So one of the things that Rosie, is that how you pronounce it? Is that right, Marcus? Okay. So one of the things, I was calling him Rosie, but one of the things, John, that he was really going hard at in the closing arguments is the investigation, right? The timeline and the investigation. But he basically said, time and time again, he tells the jury, we had to do their job, meaning law enforcement. John, how effective was that?
I think he was effective in showing the disagreement between agencies and sort of some muffed handoffs. There were interviews, numerous interviews that were recorded over. They didn't even have the names of all the people that they had recorded interviews over, which I mean, think about that. This is clearly the largest case in Carroll County history. And it's one thing to have a malfunction of a device that records over, or user error that lets something record over, but not having a list of everyone you've interviewed so you can go back if something like that happens and re-interview people, not having handwritten notes along with the interview so you can reconstruct as best as possible those interviews. I think he was very effective in showing that they started an investigation and then they got sidetracked numerous times internally, not by new leads, but by their own mistakes and errors. And then there was some infighting. The state police came in. The state police dismissed the FBI and their technical help. Why the infighting? Why are you going against all the technology that could help you not make a mistake? And then that lends itself to saying it's now believable that they made a mistake. And that was kind of the key bridge first, we're saying they made a mistake. Obviously, he's pleading not guilty, but how could they make such a big mistake? And that was the important part of Rossi's closing. Here's how they could make such a mistake.
Just taking some notes. So, Susan, we covered Karen Reed, the first case. I've never seen a trial that's more tribal than that, and full of vitriol. I'm seeing shades of that, not nearly as bad here, but people are very divided here. Either you think he's guilty or you think he's innocent. And if you think he's innocent, you also obviously think there is too much reasonable doubt. I hear a lot of people saying, don't deliberate this verdict based on emotion, deliberate based on the evidence. Are you seeing this tribalism here?
Oh, yeah. In the comments. And I know innocent until proven guilty. And I'm looking at all of the evidence that I see. And I agree. It was a botched investigation. And I know that Superintendent Doug Carter, he was in there today. I've met him several times. I really respect the man. I like him. I know he was on the stand and he said that he let the FBI go. He's always been so open and saying, Susan, when someone was finally arrested, he said, it's not just me. And he said, I know people have come out of retirement for this. So my point is their hearts have been in this. And I think the small town where I am right now, I mean, it's so small. I met one of Libby's friends. It just so happened I got my haircut here. I've been there this long. So I started talking to her. She said, I was one of Libby's best friends. And she has a 2-year-old now. So it got me thinking, oh my gosh, would Libby have a 2-year-old now? And she was telling me all about Libby and how just the small town. And we could say it over and over again, but I think obviously and clearly they were not prepared for this. Early on, they set up a tip line. How was it filed? I mean, they've admitted several mistakes. They shut the media out and said, we're not saying anything. And clearly, now that this has gone on, we've learned mistakes that they've made. But one thing they didn't do ever is arrest someone. Never. We've heard names, and I remember calling at the time it was Sheriff Tobe Lesenby, like, is someone in custody? Are you looking into him? Well, Susan, I can't say anything. Okay. And then finally, out of the blue, this guy's arrested. No one had ever heard of him. And it was Richard Allen. But I believe because he put himself there, he came forward, and I believe because of the small town, there was no one else on the bridge that it couldn't be him. That's what I believe, just seeing the evidence that I saw. But it's going to be up to the jury. And I see why this is divisive. And I understand that you may think that he's being lambasted, but why would the families want an innocent man put away? They wouldn't. They're blamed too. And the truth is, if a guy who did this is free walking around, that would be the worst thing that they could ever think of.
By the way, Susan, I mean, you've been in broadcast news a long time. I'm sure you have a thick skin, but people, I've seen comments, people coming after you that you're,
always
pro prosecution. So how are you handling that? Because I know it's tough. You're there. You're in a small, unfamiliar place.
Well, I do have thick skin. It might be Jersey strong, but not that thick. So sometimes I just have to not read them because I take offense and then I want to say something back and they, not rude, but I understand that. And if he's innocent, I look at his wife. I look over at his mother. I feel horrible for them. I truly do. And if he's not guilty, I feel horrible for him. But I believe based on what I heard the prosecution, and by the way, McClellan's not boring. He's out of the gate. He was underestimated. And I think he did an excellent job. But there were holes in this. There's mistakes. There was zero DNA. The DNA expert on the stand, she went through item by item by item. It's a state's witness. So I understand the holes. As she's going on, they said, well, this is an unidentifiable male DNA. And this is just one example. She was on the stand for a long time, and it came back, and it was someone at the lab. Contamination. So this could go either way, but I believe that Richard Allen and what was on Libby's phone, and we watched that. We've heard about it for 7 years. We finally got to see it, and it was in the closings, and you hear the girls' voices, and Libby sounds so young. I mean, they are young, 14 and 15, but I look over and I see Tara, her aunt. She's a tough woman. She starts crying because you hear their voices again. It puts you there, and I understand the comments about not just emotion, but he put himself there. His car is seen on surveillance. I think all the elements are there. What's on Libby's phone? I believe he is Bridge Guy. And therefore, I believe he is the killer. That's my opinion. innocent till proven guilty. We'll see what the jurors think. But I can see the other side. I see the holes in this. And this may go on. Who knows how long they'll deliberate. But please, come
on. Sorry, cut you off there. But, I'd love to hear like a Dr. Gary Mercado and Ann Burgess, of course, the living legend, just how someone with no history suddenly, acts out in this crazy violent way. Someone said, look, same deal with Kohberger, but the difference is like 20 or 25 years. Richard Allen's much older. So he would have had to kind of keep those temptations, I guess, at bay for way longer than a guy like Brian Kohberger. Marcus, back to you. And John, in no way do I want you to leave, but I know you're sitting in a car kind of trapped there. So, we're easy here, but I'd like you to stay if you can. Marcus, to you, there was a point during the defense closing here where Rosie here, he recalls this contentious examination with a woman named Sarah Carbaugh. And he was going after her because she kept using the words muddy and bloody in different interviews with investigators. He talks about this, and then he stops his closings and says, I've got to take a breath before I talk about her. How did that moment play out in court today? It's a pretty, it's a gangster criminal defense move right there. So how do you think the jurors reacted to it?
Well, like I said, the jurors were pretty laser focused today, and it's really was hard to read them today, but I know I had a reaction to that. He actually continued to say that her testimony was worthless to him. He said that in court today, so it was very shocking, at least to me, sitting in the gallery. But he did point out the fact that when she was first interviewed by law enforcement, she said that this guy, and for those that don't know, this was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The girls went missing just after 2 o'clock. And she saw this guy while she was driving on the road, walking, and she originally told police that he looked muddy. And then in a later police interview, she said he was bloody. And then as time went on, it was muddy and bloody. And then the description of the clothing that this guy was wearing also changed. And Rosie today brought up the fact that, if I hand you a lineup and just say, do you think it was this guy? Or just a picture of, do you think it was this guy? She's more likely to say yes if you're just showing her that one photo. Because at one point she said the jacket this guy was wearing was tan, but then maybe that was because of the mud. But is there also blood on this jacket? What color is the jacket? So in her testimony, there was a lot of things that the defense was poking at, and that came out today in closing arguments.
Back to John Tompkins. This comment's interesting here from John Casey, and I've read about this kind of extensively. People believe there's no way one person did this alone. The timeline doesn't fit, and the crime scene doesn't fit. And if you ask the next person, they say the timeline fits perfectly. So this is one opinion. You needed more than one person. So, John, the answer to that, plus the fact that, from what I understand, there's zero DNA or trace evidence linked back to Richard Allen. This is a brutal crime. How is that possible?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, first, he has the same car. Now, you might be able to get rid of clothes and things like that, but everybody knows that we hear about these cold cases where they retest DNA evidence from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So car carpet, if he's really stepped in blood and soaked in blood, and I go back to, this isn't a shooting from even 10 feet away. The killer has to be within arm's length to slit their throats. Has to be. And when that happens, I have a cutthroat murder right now. When that happens, blood literally explodes out. It pumps out from the vessels in the neck, and it splatters. You cannot stop that from happening. It seems very incredible, that fact alone. But on the topic of physical evidence, there's so many mistakes. And, jurors are told to stay away from empathy as opposed to evidence. They can't convict based on sympathy. So when you look at the evidence here, there's some things that the prosecutor, and I have a lot of respect for Mr. McClellan and all the prosecutors I work with, but they said they had all these confessions. They end up with a few phone calls. It is not a confession if you're saying you committed a crime that never occurred. That's a mischaracterization. That is by definition not a confession. If I say that I killed someone who is still alive, I have not confessed to a crime because there's not a crime. So why do they say there's 60 confessions? Because it sounds compelling. It sounds like there's a ton of evidence. In the end, it will come back to bite them, and I think it did, by the jury never seeing 60 confessions. The written confession, if you saw that piece of paper, it's written on in 3 separate orientations. There are 3 different writings on it. You have to turn it 90 degrees to see the 3 different writings. There's 1 signature. What was being signed? When were those 3 separate things written on that sheet of paper? None of them are dated. They clearly were not written at the same time. They're not coherent sentences. The bullet evidence, they promised a match. And when the evidence came in, that was such faulty science, incredibly faulty science. It wasn't science at all. It was bad forensics, and it was stacked, and it was created for the express intent. And that analyst pretty much admitted on the stand that she just developed the Allen protocol for the Allen gun. And she admitted she didn't apply that protocol to any of the other 4 guns that she tested. And she didn't have a match because she was comparing spent casings in the end to an unfired bullet. The unfired bullets from the Allen gun were never matched to the bullet in the field. And the prosecutor promised a match. Now, it's not his fault. Mr. McClellan didn't do the investigation. He can only present the case that the investigators give to him. But what you call these things is important, and jurors remember those things. And if they don't add up, that's where state problems really start to snowball.
I can see it on her face. Hendricks wants to respond to that. Go ahead.
And the wonderful, I was lucky, Cheryl McCullum was in the courtroom that night with me, the ballistics expert. And you know how this can go. Could be the battle of the experts. So the defense has an expert, the state has an expert. I get that. But Cheryl McCullum, and she gets in fact, they did match this. And she was on point. She was on the stand for 5 hours. And Rosie went after her and after her and after her. And finally, he looked at the judge and he's like, do you want to take a break? She said, no. You felt like you were watching a boxing match between a very good attorney and I thought an expert that could not be frazzled at all or shaken. She stuck to her testimony. And I looked at Cheryl because a lot of it was over my head. And she said, nailed it. They match. So I guess what can the jury understand? What do they see? And it was cross-referenced. Their ballistic expert isn't even certified, if that's even the correct word. But it's something to where accredited. Thank you, my good friend. You mean all these people outside? He was in court too. Accredited. Sorry, I digress. But it can go back to the battle of the experts. It's what does the jury believe? But I think that bullet is like a fingerprint. That's my belief based on the expert, based on what I saw at the scene. I believe that bullet is the most important evidence. You know why? Because Rosie kept her on the stand for 6 hours. And he even said in his closing, if it wasn't for the bullet, he wouldn't have been arrested. That bullet, I believe, is the testimony that directly ties Richard Allen to that scene. Hello?
Joel, you might be muted.
Oh, okay.
That's my fault. That's me. Sorry.
Oh, good.
Sorry.
I thought it was my phone. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I told you I should not be an audio tech guy. So what I was saying is that Rosie just kind of keeps going, and he gets to a guy named Brad Weber, I believe it is, or Weber. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Weber.
And he says that he owns the property near the crime scene, but he too, like this other witness, makes contradictory statements about whether he went straight home after work on the day of the murders. And then he, obviously he's trying to stir up reasonable doubt, but he says that Weber's gun, forgive me, had not been excluded. Although later on you find out that Nick McClelland, the prosecutor, says that it was tested. What do we know about this neighbor? Again, I know they're trying to sow reasonable doubt, but what do you make of this? Marcus, that's for you.
Okay, got it. Well, what I would say, and what I've been saying in my reports, is that Brad Weber is someone that hasn't come up too much until pretty close to the trial. They said that, he was interviewed in the beginning of the process, but they didn't really get back to him in August of this year. And he really took center stage for a few days there in court. And he kind of fits in many ways. I mean, his home is closest to where the girls' bodies were found. Investigators, McClelland says, asked the day that the girls went missing if they could search that property. He consented, and it's a big property. Half of it is fields, half of it is woods close to the creek near where the girls were found. So there's that aspect of it, just his house being so close in proximity. And then you have this gun that was tested. It's a 6-hour gun. Richard Allen's gun that was tested was a 6-hour gun. And yes, so this gun expert testified that this unspent cartridge had to come from Richard Allen's gun, but they got it out of her that Brad Weber's gun couldn't be excluded. And we never got a full explanation for that. But of course, the defense really honed in on that so you're saying this could only come from Richard Allen's gun, but this hasn't been excluded. So that is one facet of Brad Weber. And then the other one is that in the one confession that was in the records from Richard Allen's psychologist, Dr. Waller, when he was in Westfield Correctional Facility. And the reason why I say it's in her records is because we don't have a recording of this one. This one wasn't over the phone to his family, but it was the most detailed one that we saw. And in these records, he says that he sees that white van come down this private drive near the Monon High Bridge and scares him. And then he crosses the creek with the girls. And the only private drive down there and the only house down there is Brad Weber. So he kind of fits in this in multiple different ways. He's a witness testifying about his whereabouts to see if that fits, if he was actually driving along that private drive at that time. He lives very, very close to the girls, to where the girls were found. And he has a gun that was tested by law enforcement that couldn't be excluded. Susan, let me know if I'm missing anything. I feel like we've talked a lot about Brad Weber in court.
You're on point there, yeah.
Yeah, Susan, anything you want to add there before I hop back to John?
I think that Brad Weber, when I heard about him throughout the investigation at times, but you're absolutely right that he didn't come up much. But what the prosecution is saying is that white van and the fact that Richard Allen said, again, not recorded, but said to the psychologist in prison, that he was interrupted. And you're right, it was a detailed confession where he said, I was laying in wait, I followed them across the bridge, I led them down the hill, my intention was to rape, I got interrupted by the van. So interrupted by a van, he had them cross the creek, slit their throats, made sure they were dead. But that van is what the prosecution is saying only the killer would know. And they tied it to Brad Weber, and he's disgruntled, he doesn't want to be there. He seems a little bit, I feel bad for the guy, off. So you could see how it's feasible. They said you have 5 outhouses. We all know, Joel, the outhouses are where you look. But he's on there and he says, no, I clocked out with a badge. So he left that day, work at 2:02 p.m. That puts him around near the bridge at around 2:30, which the timeline shows, according to Nick McClelland, that is around the time where he was interrupted, and only the killer would know that.
Back to John Tompkins. I'm just looking for this specifically, but this comment here, because I have notes on what it was specifically. But can one of the panel, which would be John, describe the torture visual aid used in the defense closing? It looks like it was a photo of a medieval torture device, which is an interesting technique. I don't think I've ever seen that in a trial. But John, this obviously is coupled with the question I was going to ask you, which is the defense making a very big deal, as others have, that this guy was held in a prison, not a jail. He was held in solitary. This is where he had a psychotic break. You had a witness who even said that he was found naked, eating his feces, which is about as horrible an image you can get. Other, of course, except for the crime itself here, which is way worse. But So, John, I mean, what about all this? Have you ever seen someone put up a torture device in a closing argument to kind of make it analogous to what he was experiencing in this prison?
No, I have not seen that type of visualization to illustrate a point. And I believe there was like a thumb screw device. There was also like a body binding type of device. I didn't see those visuals myself. I'm going on descriptions that I've seen. That, I think, and this is what I said before, I think that was maybe too much of a reach. And I say that because there's so much that you could visualize, and we've heard that was visualized to this jury from the actual videos of his actual behavior in the prison where he really should never have been kept. Even if they couldn't keep him in the Carroll County jail, the jury's in Lafayette, that's Tippecanoe County. He could have been kept in the Lafayette, in the Tippecanoe County jail. He could have been kept in a different jail facility. It was so wrong-headed to keep him in a prison. And now that is one of the biggest things that the defense has. Solitary confinement, separate issue from keeping him in a prison versus a jail, wherever you're in solitary confinement. There are studies that show there is actual physical damage done to the brain to a person who is kept in solitary confinement for as short as 13 days. Physical damage to the brain. It is indisputable. The state's witnesses didn't really dispute that he had a psychotic episode. One of their rebuttal witnesses said, well, we medicated him and we got him out of that before he started confessing. Really? There's a pill for that? And once he came out of it, I decided to up his medication. Oh, anybody who knows the basics of trying to medicate someone out of a psychotic episode knows that it takes days, if not weeks, to observe the effect of the medication to see if it's effective before you can even adjust off of it. So that mistake in where he was kept has come back to haunt the state over and over and over, and has given a really core defense to these supposed confessions, some of which aren't confessions, and some of which are simply disprovable statements. We know they're false statements.
So that's, I think, something that's going to stick with the jurors too. Was this guy tortured to the point of confessing? Of course, people are going to say, how could you confess that many times? KCL is a friend of the show, helps us behind the scenes, and she always knows all the details of every trial that we're discussing. Supposedly, he was held in prison and solitary for his own protection. And because he was in solitary and put on unalive watch, that was the reasoning behind his treatment. However, Richard Allen was not a model prisoner. There's another witness who Rosie kind of went after in the closings, Marcus, and this is Dr. Monica Walla, if I'm pronouncing that one correct too, at Westville. And he says she's a prison psychologist. And Rosie basically says, look, she was infatuated, and that's the word he used, with the Delphi murder case. She did not recuse herself in any way. She treats Allen at the Westville Correctional Facility, and then comes and testifies in court, giving a more detailed account central to the state's case. This is what Rosie's saying. Did that resonate within the courtroom when he was talking about that?
Well, my mind, when he was talking about that, went straight back to her testimony. We had a lot of psychologists come in this trial. I believe there was 5, if you're counting psychologists and psychiatrists. And Monica Walla's testimony was for the state, but I think it was the weakest out of all of the psychologists, because when jurors found out that she had an interest in this case before she even had Richard Allen as a patient, that was one time you were able to see their reactions. And she did not deny that on the stand. She said she did. She said she listened to podcasts about it. She said she did research about it. She said she was in online chat rooms about it. And that is something that really stuck with the jurors, not only today in closings, but during her testimony. And Rosie kept on at it in cross-examination. Obviously, he did his research. She, in her free time, visited the Monon High Bridge while she was caring for Richard Allen. So there's no doubt that the psychologist that was treating Richard Allen in Westville Correctional Facility was interested in this case for a very long time, to the point where she was engaging regularly on social media, telling people where they could find information about it. And that just reminded me, she testified on the stand that she was looking up information in records that you could only access through the Indiana Department of Corrections. So out of all the psychologists, whether it was for the state or the defense and the psychiatrists, I think that that really stuck with the jurors, especially that part.
This is a question I've had myself to Susan. Is the prosecution 100% sure that the pick of the bridge guy is the one that did the crime? How do they know that? It's never been clear to me. I accidentally take pictures all the time. Your response to this, and then I want to ask you about the mothers.
Well, even after Richard Allen was arrested, and I remember that press conference, I believe it was on Halloween 2022, October 31st, Nick McClellan gets up there and he says, look, we believe there may be other actors involved. So they always said he may not have just acted alone, but now they believe, and that was brought up too, to talk about investigatory problems here. Isn't it true, Sheriff Tobe Lesenby, at the time, that you thought there were other people involved as well? And I remember at one of the press conferences where, and his name is, I can't think of it, but he said, look, all you see is this, but there could be something going on down here and could be something going on down here. So you never knew, is it just one person? Now they all believe, they say that it is Richard Allen. They believe it's just him on the bridge. But they said, even if you think that maybe someone else was involved, we believe that Richard Allen is bridge guy on the bridge. Of course, McClellan said they believe it's just him. He worked alone, but he's also charged. There's 4 counts with kidnapping. Even if you just think he's leading them down the hill, something else may have happened. I believe that he is 100% bridge guy. But all through the investigation, great question, because you didn't know. You didn't know. Oh, are you muted? I don't know.
Yeah.
I keep doing that. I keep muting. I mute myself instead of Susan. So again, I should not be an audio tech. I need the COE. The COE's out for girls' night out with her friends. So she's having fun. I hope my 3 kids home alone. No, they have a babysitter. They'll be fine. John, let me go to you on this one. I mean, this psychotic episode sounded really alarming, scary. I mean, this guy is reportedly, again, I don't want to gross everyone out, eating his own feces. Why was this guy not hospitalized, in your opinion? I know you're a criminal defense attorney, not a physician, but you've had these criminal defendants as clients. Should he have been sent to a hospital?
I think he should have been sent to a mental institution for a mental health evaluation. A hospital, he wasn't physically harming himself. He wasn't, he was placed in solitary confinement, so no other inmates were harming him. So I can see why he wasn't taken to a traditional hospital. But Logansport in Indiana has a mental health institute for people who are incarcerated, and they do competency evaluations. They're built to do that at Logansport. So, but Logansport is for pretrial detainees. It's not for post-conviction. So I think this may be as simple as, well, DOC doesn't deal with pretrial detainees. They have their own different way of treating the mentally ill. They don't have to worry about whether someone's competent to stand trial, because everyone who goes there, except Mr. Allen, has already been to trial and been convicted. So they don't rely, and they're just not familiar with the process of getting him to Logansport. His defense team tried repeatedly to get him taken out of that environment, and that was never allowed.
Lone Wolf here, get a CIA mind control expert, and those 60 confessions get destroyed due to 2 solitary confinements. It's called brainwashing, splitting of the mind. Interesting. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that. Midwest in the house. Indiana in the Midwest, I think. Kind of, sort of, pretty much in the Midwest. Susan, back to you. I just want to know, you said you were with the moms last night. What's your state of mind? Obviously, it's super sensitive and you want to be careful, not to trigger them. But I'm just curious, what they're like, what it's like to interact with them, your personal experience, if you care to share it.
Yeah. And quickly, just touch on, eventually there was a hearing at the end of July for 3 days and ended on August 1st. And Judge Gull usually makes rulings via, she doesn't usually say it in court that day. She sits on it and then you get the document or the paperwork. But that day she did say, this is what I am ruling on. He's moved to Cass County Jail. And that's when first time I ever saw Richard Allen smile. So that happened at the end of July. So going back to the families, there's a gag order, very obviously, and I respect that. And so when I go there and I've gotten to know them, and I was there last night having dinner and having fun with them, I gain strength from them. So I don't ask specifics, obviously, about it, but I'm just, it's great to be around them, and I've got to know them. And I don't know, I just enjoy being around them. And Kelsey, I went to her baby shower. Now she's pregnant with a baby number 2, little girl 2. And I think that brings so much joy. But of course, it's gut wrenching, and they're afraid. And I see Becky looking at the jurors, and I see Becky, they want the right guy, and they believe it's the right guy. I think they believe it's the right guy. I'm speaking for them, minus that. But they want the guy who did this to pay for it. Because when you see, there's nothing like seeing these crime scene photos. And again, I agree with the defense attorney. I'm on board. You can't rule with your emotions. But somebody did that to those girls. This is a town of less than 3,000 people, cut that in half, 1,000 men. Who has a Monday off? Who's down there at the bridge? Who puts himself there at the bridge? Given the other guys, that could be it. It has to be someone. There was no DNA, but it doesn't mean a ghost killed those 2 girls. Somebody did, and I saw the aftermath. It's horrific. And someone, I believe the right person is in custody, but we'll see. Again, they're deliberating again tomorrow morning, and this will be the first full day that they have the case. And I believe in the system. I truly do. And don't things about me down below.
That is a beautiful courthouse, by the way. I love these old courthouses. I was in Orlando for Sarah Boone, and it's like the only skyscraper in Orlando was built like 3 days ago, which was nice too. But I like the old style here. Marcus, to you on this, and I promise we'll wrap in just a couple minutes, but I'm kind of getting riveted by this now. Again, it was brought up that by the defense that they believe that it could have also been 2 people. Went on, Rosie did, to say, and I quote here, the state completely ignored the theory of multiple actors. And then you've got this former Carroll County sheriff who told investigators initially that he believed that there was more than one person. Then you get to his size. He's 5 foot 5 inches. I mean, I know these are 13 and 14-year-old girls, but still, it's 2 young girls to overpower a little guy potentially. The prosecutor here at this point says to everybody, the state has asked you to use your common sense, but now I'm asking you to use your common sense. And he said that Richard Allen came forward himself in 2017 to offer information to police after the murder. So what is the, I guess, the reaction that you're hearing to this possible 2-person or more than 1 person involvement in the murders of these 2 young girls? Are people buying that?
Yeah, well, that's something that's been long talked about for as long as this investigation has been going on. And that's something that the defense team wanted in this trial, and they weren't allowed to talk about it because Judge Gull ruled against it. She kept on saying they needed to have that nexus to really connect whoever they thought else was involved to that case, and they didn't have it. But this is, I think they've insinuated throughout the trial, well, if he didn't do this, how can someone do all of this? But really, in closing arguments today was the first time that it was explicitly told to the jury, well, hey, I think more than 1 person did this. And I think there are a lot of people that would agree, like Susan has been saying, it was a very gruesome crime scene. So there are people out there, and you ask, and they just can't believe that 1 person can do this all, especially in the timeline that the state has. It would have had to been in under an hour and a half to 5 Richard Allen, control these girls, do what happened to them, and then get out of there without being detected at that time. But yeah, it's a theory that's been talked about for a really long time. A lot of people believe it. A lot of people don't. The defense wasn't allowed to talk about it in trial, but they really, really wanted to, because I think they do truly believe that more than one person committed this crime, whether, it was Richard Allen with someone else or completely other people. But today, once again, in closing arguments, was the first time that they explicitly laid that out for the jury that could be a theory.
A final question here for John, then we'll get some closing thoughts and thoughts about the jurors, because they're the only ones at this point, besides Libby and Abby and their families, who really matter, because they're going to make the ultimate decision if they can come to some sort of agreement on a verdict here. But John, I'm a little slow on the uptake, and I know there was no new information about these headphones, I guess, being plugged into the cell phone, and then during the closings, Rosie comes out and says it was a simple conclusion that someone was using the phone between 5:45 p.m. and 10:32 p.m., which devastates the state's timeline. Can you explain what this sort of curveball was with the headphones? I think Marcus did last night. I didn't fully understand it. John, maybe I'll get it now.
So the defense brought in a digital forensics expert who went through the same data that the state police went through from the phone that was recovered. And she simply went deeper into the data, literally just continued to click and open folders further than the state police expert had. And she found that a set of headphones had been in the phone and had been unplugged from the phone hours after the state said that phone had just been laying basically inactive, not dead, it hadn't died yet, but inactive. And the state came back and tried to address that with their expert, but this is one of the big problems with the timeline. And it's kind of incredible when you think about it, that if the person who's on the bridge sees this phone, knows they have the phone, they're taking the video on the phone, it ends up still at the scene. It's not taken from the scene by the perpetrator, but it turns out to be a really important piece of evidence in I think, again, two ways. One, it throws the state's timeline off. It says there is, as the defense said in their opening, human hands touched that phone at a time when the state says these girls were dead, and it was still under one of the girls when it was recovered. So it blows that up. It also is another layer of botched investigation. That data was there when the state police looked through the data. They just didn't find it.
Gets every one of these trials is just like a crazy story unto itself. This is no exception. KCL, I lied. This is the final question. I've got to defer to KCL. I questioned something she said yesterday, and she's probably still mad at me. Joel asked Susan to talk about what McClellan said about Libby at the end of his rebuttal closing argument today, how she was interested in true crime and wanted to solve cases or something along those lines. That's both sad and really fascinating.
Yeah, throughout this investigation, and when we saw the video that Libby took, and she would always be described when I asked, especially by Becky, that she loved watching the true crime shows, and she was even considering studying forensics when she was over, and she had a keen sense, obviously. She knew to hit record on her phone. And Mike said to me, Susan, I think that she was going to come home that day and say, Grandpa, look at this creepy guy on the bridge. And essentially Nick McClelland is saying, Libby wanted to be investigator, and finally she's investigating her own crime, essentially saying she did her part, and the family would say this throughout when no one was in custody and they were looking for the guy. Now do yours if you see this person, meaning that Libby did what she could. Now it's up to the jurors to do what they can with reasonable doubt and look at the sum of all of its parts and say, could this guy who was off from CVS that day, who puts himself at the bridge, who was there, who said he was wearing what bridge guy was wearing, Libby got the evidence, now make the right decision, is essentially what McClelland said in rebuttal.
There you have it. And KCL, look, for the record, I forgive you. I wasn't mad at you. I think you're superb, even giving me a superlative. I love it. So let's wrap this up. Marcus is a reporter for the CBS affiliate out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. It is Wayne 15, and I told him this last night. At his stage of the career he's at now, when I was there, I would have, number one, probably been too afraid to come on any show. Number two, would have been awful at explaining if this guy is, he's got talent. Even the COE, who criticizes everyone on air. Last night she said, hey, that young reporter was great. I was like, yeah, let's get him back on. So, yeah, so there you go, Marcus. It's not just, if you get credit from the COE, you know you're doing well. But I got to ask, I mean, so what have the, number one, have the jurors been giving tells? I've heard that the jurors are really stoic. It's hard to read what's going on. I got to ask you, how do you think this ends up verdict wise? I don't know if you're one to share that, because I know you're a reporter, but if not that, how long do you think this goes for?
Yeah. So I originally, a week ago, I really didn't know too much. And I think now there's a little more clarity, but for me, it's still not there to say, I think 100% that this is going not guilty. I think that this is going guilty. I think there's a chance that we could have a hung jury, but I will say that that opinion has dwindled a little bit since last week. There was a lot of talk in the courtroom amongst reporters last week saying that this could be a hung jury, and that's definitely still a possibility. But I think now, especially with closing arguments today, it's a little more clear that I think these jurors will be able to decide, but I think that it's going to take days. Is that Saturday? I don't know. A lot of people are thinking Saturday, so that would be whatever the 2.5 hours they had today, all day tomorrow, all day Saturday. But I could see it going until Monday because they have Sunday off. So I'm thinking 3 to 4 days as far as how long it takes them to go.
There you go, 3 to 4 days. I'll probably be calling you as soon as you get off the air. Maybe you'll hop on with us. You know, we like to pick up the scraps here at STS. But John, to you, you've been through this many times. You know, they say waiting is the hardest part, right? But these jurors have been sequestered, I guess, for, you know, over 2 weeks, close to 3 weeks now. They've got to be itching to get home. How does that factor into all this? Do you expect what Marcus just said for this jury to come back, you know, in the next 2 to 3 days or sooner? I've seen a lot of people in the chat just now say it's going to come back tomorrow or Saturday. What do you think?
I'd be surprised if we were waiting on Monday. So yes, I agree with that part of it. I think before Monday we'll see a verdict. I don't think we'll see a hung jury. I really don't. It's so as far as the jurors, I've done over 100 jury
Let me ask you. I'm
trials.
sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but why no hung? Why are you so adamant about no hung jury?
Because there's this core, and the state has what they call confessions. So even though there's a lot, you know, there's some digital forensics, there's some bullet evidence, there's some other evidence. I really think this boils down to, will the jury believe that the confessions were caused by the psychosis or that they are actual confessions? I think the rest of the stuff, lack of DNA, you know, I think that really washes out because you have words from Mr. Allen's own mouth. And the question is, are we going to believe those words that came out of his mouth? And all that other stuff, interesting, but I think this jury's going to focus in on the words that came out of Mr. Allen's mouth and whether they can believe those words beyond a reasonable doubt. That's why I don't think there's going to be a hung jury. And these, you know, the jurors aren't going to be in a rush to get home. The jurors aren't going to come back with a sympathy verdict. Well, somebody's got to pay kind of verdict. Although it's accurate in the court of public opinion to say somebody should pay for this. The right person should pay for this crime, this heinous crime. But every jury I've had, they've taken their duty to get through the evidence and to get to agreement honestly, seriously, and they take the time that is necessary because all those jurors sitting in that room know that this decision will rest with them for the rest of their lives. And none of them want to call the court on Monday and say, I felt rushed and I'm not sure today. They will take the time they need to get to that place in their mind before they come forward. And I think that will take a couple days, but not a week.
And I think people underestimate the heaviness of being a juror, particularly in a case like this or a Brian Koberger case where literally the defendant's life is on the line. I know that 2 young girls were killed, but as you just heard John say, you want to make sure they've got the right person, and the jury is going to decide that, and that is how our system works. Barbara Banash, Monday is a federal holiday. I had no idea. I guess it might be Veterans Day. Susan Hendricks, are they going to deliberate on a federal holiday? That's a good point. And just your take on the jurors, and same thing. How long do you think this goes for?
Yeah, they'll absolutely be deliberating on the holiday, because I think it was Friday opening statements. It was Columbus Day, was it? So absolutely, and them being sequestered, but I don't get that sense. What I sense with this jury, exactly what everyone is saying. They're taking it seriously. And in Indiana, you get a sense of what they're thinking because they're allowed to ask questions. They are engaged. They're listening to everything. One of the jurors in the upper right, closest to where we sit, and Marcus could attest to this, scans the room and looks around, and at times you see them staring at Kathy Allen or looking over towards the families. They take it seriously. I don't have, if I were to guess, I would say Monday, but I don't know what they'll come back with. I think, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's tough. I don't know, but I believe they're taking it seriously. And I think exactly what Nick McClelland said in opening statements, what's reasonable? What is reasonable? This guy put himself there. He had the day off from work. He knows the bridge. He lives nearby. He wore the same outfit. I believe they're going to weigh all of that and come back with the decision.
Well, huge thanks to, despite the audio issues tonight, huge thanks to John Tompkins, who's a criminal defense attorney out of Indianapolis, who's doing analysis for, I believe it is Fox 59. And then you've got Marcus Truccio, who is with Wayne 15, an amazing young reporter who's going to be either doing network news or kicking my you-know-what in the world of podcasting, one or the other. Definitely will not be able to compete with him, that is for sure. And, of course, Susan Hendricks, the Jersey girl, the OG Jersey girl. She's a former anchor for HLN, also for CNN, now doing a lot of true crime reporting. She wrote the book on this case, Down the Hill, My Descent into the Double Murder in Delphi, Down the Hill. Pick up a copy. It's a sad, sad tale, but we're going to see how this all ends. Tomorrow, crazy case out of Utah where an estranged husband is murdered by the family, the wife's family, the mother's involved, the brother's involved, the ex-wife or the estranged wife, all arrested. Eerily similar to our original case about Dan Markel and the Adelsons. And the weirdest thing about this story, they live in Utah, but they were Googling Donna Adelson. They were Googling Katie Magbanawa, who is the go-between between the hitmen and the Dan Markel case. And they were Googling Dan Markel himself. So it's really fascinating. We're going to do that with Phil and Scott tomorrow at 12:30. We're going to be on Verdict Watch, and we'll get you the verdict once we hear about it. But a huge thanks to these 3 guests. Love you, America. Love you, Delphi, Indiana. And, of course, it's all about justice for Libby and Abby. We'll see you guys tomorrow on the flip side.